Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Bex Ferriday, and yes, I'm a learning technology manager at Cardiff University, but I'm also a new PhD student at Cardiff University. So I am my life is beholden to Cardiff University at the moment. And I just want to talk a little bit about where my PhD is and how it came about and what I plan to do, and any input, suggestions, questions, ideas, or anything from anyone here would be very welcome. So I'm going to start by going back to the 1980s, that ages me, and where I discovered the Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson fighting fantasy books at the age of, I think I was 11 or 12. And I fell in love with them and discovered that I really loved choose your own adventure books, and as a result really got into role-playing games. Though I have to make a disclaimer, which will probably chuck me out of this conference, that I'm not a tabletop game player and I'm not a Dungeons and Dragons player. I am 100% totally a video game player, but an absolute total fan of role-playing games from the 80s and from the introduction of these books. So I played those books, really got into them, and then time went by and I hit adulthood and I discovered video game consoles, and lo and behold, I discovered a gaming studio called Bethesda, and an early work of theirs called, I forget now, called Morrowind, which I played, a long time ago, but was the first example of a sort of an open world role-playing game, and I loved it. I spent hundreds of hours making potions and building things and killing things, and I really loved it. So I was very, very happy when a few years later Bethesda went on and made another game, a follow-up to Morrowind and part of the Elder Scrolls series of games, and this one was called Oblivion. A little bit graphically better than the last one. Again, a really good example of an open world game, a role-playing game where you could choose your race, who you were, what approach you took to the game, whether you wanted to kill things, whether you wanted to sneak around, whether you wanted to be a magician or a warrior. And again, I spent hundreds of hours playing this game until a few years later, along came the next in the Elder Scrolls series, and a game that is quite familiar, Skyrim. A game that's now 12 years old, I believe, and I am still playing. It's an amazing open world game. Graphically, again, you can see that's a little bit improved on the past games. And I loved it. And again, hundreds of hours still going into playing Skyrim, even 12 years later. The next slide, muted YouTube, so I should be okay. Yeah, so one evening last year, I had a couple of things playing on my mind. I had a colleague that had arbitrarily halted progress on a project, so I sort of felt a bit frustrated and a bit anxious. My well-being wasn't really at its best. And another thing was that I had a problem that I'd been asked to solve around using an appropriate and robust digital platform for a healthcare assessment for nursing students. There was nothing much on TV, so I didn't really know what to do. So I just fired up Skyrim for an hour while dinner was cooking. And as I played, I sort of took out my pent-up frustrations on a myriad of foes, including a massive dragon with an obsidian war axe. And I walked around one of my houses, as you can see here. I've sped this up a bit. And I wanted to have a look at my collection of armour and weapons and tidy them up a bit. So I did that, as you can see, and then I sort of left the house. And finally, before dinner was ready and I had to turn the game off, I took in a few sort of breathtaking panoramas from the top of snow-covered mountains and beside frozen rivers of ice. That's my unicorn, by the way, Susan. Very well behaved usually. Does quite like attacking things, so quite handy to have in a fight. Anyway, took in all these beautiful apricot-coloured panoramas, said hello to Susan, did a bit of killing, dinner was ready, switched off the Xbox. And then I realised that after playing the game, I felt calmer and more focused and less anxious. And not only that, but I've been able to work through a variety of solutions for my colleague who wanted some help with an assessment platform, and sort of decided that I wasn't going to send that nasty email off to the colleague who'd peed me off that day, because really I was much more mature and calm and zen, and everything was great. So I realised these were unintended consequences of me playing the game. I hadn't put the game on because I'd had a bad day and I knew it was going to make me feel better. I'd put it on because there was nothing on TV. I had an hour to kill, and I thought, let's dip into Skyrim. So I then got thinking, could there be any other unintended consequences of playing role-playing games, specifically video games? And how could they impact, for example, on higher education students' problem-solving skills, or their educational attainment, or their state of flow or zen? So the question came up, what are the unintended consequences of playing open-world role-playing games on the student's experience? And I wrestled with this for a while. And then Cardiff University actually decided that it was worth funding a PhD. So here I am today as a fresh-faced elderly PhD student. The first place I decided to look after posing my initial research question was to see what the effects of video games are on a very broad scale, as per previous research. And the first thing I noticed is that gaming is often perceived as lonely, driven by sensory overload, involving activities of an ethically questionable nature, and so really the antithesis to the development of well-being. And that gaming has also been associated with depression and aggression and anxiety. And there's been concern that exposure to extreme violence that is commonly found in video games can desensitize players, cause emotional problems, lead to acts of violence. I go out killing on a daily basis, me. But contrary to this, other more recent research suggests a positive relation between gameplay and effective well-being, and examines positive correlations between gameplay and well-being. And linked to this, further research argues that the psychological affordances provided by games are important to player experiences. So it can be argued that if a game satisfies basic needs, people will experience more enjoyment and improved levels of well-being. Furthermore, and going into a little bit more of a granular level, there is very little research around accidental byproducts or unintended consequences or happy accidents in playing video games. And what does exist is wholly negative in its findings. So unintended consequences are bad, okay, as Mr. Mackey would say. Sorry, that's very, very unfunny, very nerdy. So I need to address this. I want to challenge this. I want to see why unintended consequences are seen as being a negative thing. I think that unintended consequences can be positive, can be negative, can be neutral. They are what they are. They aren't sentient, and they don't have they're not provoked into doing things. So I'm going to be using some constructivist grounded theory, I think, to investigate this imbalance, to look for enhancements to the student experience brought about as byproducts of playing digital, open world role-playing games. And I plan to carry out a range of qualitative experiments by way of observing and interviewing higher education students who play video games, and to look for any unintended consequences when they play these games. Ultimately, hopefully, the purpose of the research will include things like the provision of guidance and recommendations and case studies for higher education academics and students with an interest in using video gaming to improve mental health their mental health or their employability skills, and academic achievement, which is quite important. Also, and I'm presuming that these slides can be made available to everyone at the end of this. If you do go and look at my slides, click on that orange My Website button, you'll see the first product that I'm tinkering with, which is a website that I'm making sort of based on my experiences, my observations, my thoughts, which hopefully one day will turn into something that can be used by educators who are interested in using games looking at their unintended consequences and how good they can be for their own students. I think after all that rambling, my 10 minutes is up. I am done. I've done proper references for this. I didn't just make it all up. And I hope you accept me as one of the community, even though I don't play Dungeons and Dragons on a tabletop. I'm so sorry. Thank you.